Well, we said we'd start at 6:30, and so we are. I think a few more people are coming. But first, I want to really thank all of you for coming to support our first presentation for the next chapter. It's something that four of us have been working on for probably almost a year. John Hallberg, who will be introducing our speaker, is one of our founders. Rick Graft, who's not here, he's out enjoying the leaves in Vermont, and Lindy Purdy. So that's the group. We hope to add more as we go. So let me tell you a little bit about next chapter and what its goal is. So next chapter is really designed to help provide resources and support for people moving from one chapter of life to the next. And as we think about next chapters, there are quite a few. So there's next chapter that I'm facing, ending a career and starting retirement and wanting to maximize that. There are people that have lost a spouse or loved one, and that's the next chapter. Divorce, an unplanned career change. And so what we want to find out is we want to find out what you folks would want. So we put a survey up on our webpage, and the webpage is in the sheet that you have. So I'd encourage you to go take the survey and let us know really what you'd like to see next chapter be. What resources you'd like, if you have speakers that you'd like us to reach out to, we'd love that. And as I was leaving work today, I saw that we had our first completed survey. Thank you, Richard. So you won't be the first, but you won't be the last either if you go ahead and do that. So that's next chapter, and Alan Hilton will be our next speaker. Those that are from the church know Alan. He's quite a well-known national speaker. And I'm thrilled to announce that our January speaker is in the house, Ann Harbison, who's another nationally known authority. And so that's going to be a wonderful. Could you try to hold the mic closer? It's very difficult. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. So Ann will be here in January, and we'll get that information up on the webpage. And so that's going to be a great presentation, and I hope you won't miss it. So just for tonight, our plan is to, Richard has a presentation that'll take approximately an hour. Then we'll have Q&A for anyone that wants to ask a question. And Richard has agreed to, is excited about signing his books that I know some of you have gotten, and he'll do that right out in Founders Hall. So that's the plan for tonight. There's one thing we'll ask for is we want to keep this a free program. And so if anyone is moved to donate to help support speakers' fees and gathering of resources, we've created a resource library in our library. It's got next chapter listed on it. We already have probably about 30 books in there, and we will continue to add those. So in the survey, let us know what books you might like us to acquire, and we will. And if you happen to have books that you'd like to donate to that, please do, if you have some that you're not using. And so again, we want to make it as good a resource as it can be, and we're going to evolve starting tonight. So this is our first event, and thrilled to have you here, and we'll see where it takes us. So I'm going to hand the ball off to John, who's going to introduce his good friend, and get started. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is John Hallberg. Whoa, there, you can hear that. My name is John Hallberg. I'm been a member here for 20 years, part of the church council. Probably for those of you that have been in this church for a while, the notion of me and Jim Zimmerman standing in front of you with microphones is your worst nightmare. So I'll just apologize for that in advance. And actually, we had a sneak preview for what you're going to hear tonight from Steve Wiens in his sermon on September 18th, where he quoted Frederick Buechner, who just passed away this past summer, who said, "Your vocation in life is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need." And that's a lot of what Richard is going to be talking about. I've had the pleasure of knowing Richard Leider For almost a decade, and most recently over the last 3 or 4 years, he and I have been developing a purpose and leadership curriculum for our shared alma mater, Gustavus Adolphus College. Those of you that are from St. Olaf in this room, well, we'll have that conversation later. But Richard is the founder of Inventure, the Purpose Company, where their mission is to help people to unlock the power of purpose and answer the question, why do you get up in the morning? An international best-selling author of 11 books, including 3 bestsellers, which have sold over 1 million copies. His latest book, which as Jim mentioned is available out in Founders Hall, Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old? The path of purposeful aging is the defining book on that topic. The Power of Purpose and Repacking Your Bags are considered classics in the personal growth field. Widely viewed as a pioneer of the global purpose movement, Richard's work is regularly featured in many media sources, and his PBS special, The Power of Purpose, was viewed by millions of people. He has taken his purpose message to all 50 states, Canada, 4 continents, and he has advised everyone from AARP to the National Football League, hard to think of those two together, AARP to the National Football League, to the U.S. State Department. And he's with us today to share his message on the path to purposeful living. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Richard Leider.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Jim, for the invite. And so, spoiler alert, to begin with, you're getting older. But the question is, are you growing older? And so I want to talk about this whole business, having been on the purpose path now for many decades myself. I'm really living in my own aging process, like we all are. And the pandemic obviously brought up a lot of existential questions about who am I, what am I doing here, what do I want to do next? And so the whole next chapter project, I think, is right on time. And so I'd like to offer a handful of my books for the library, and I'll get them to you because they're all about that in many ways. So the path to purposeful living, what I want to start with is this, that purpose is not a luxury. It's fundamental. And when I did that PBS special, I went out to neuroscience labs around the country. They sent me out, and I got to meet a lot of neuroscientists who are studying purpose in health, purpose in healing, purpose in longevity. And, ask me about 7.5, because what we now know is that minimally, with a good purpose mindset, oftentimes it adds 7.5 years to life. So purpose is fundamental, and it's universal, and it's not a luxury. And so over time, as I've had the privilege of writing about it, speaking about it, thinking about it, living it in my own life, I've come to that reality. And you talk about all those transitions, and today, the pandemic has obviously stirred this, but about 1 out of 3 people today, and purpose, by the way, is age adverse. It's younger, middle, later life. Purpose shows up in all of those. But 1 out of 3 people today is in some transition. So if you just look at the person on your left here for a minute and take a look and see if they look like they're in transition. And if they look pretty steady, then look at the person on your right. If they look pretty grounded, then you're the 1 out of 3. So maybe that's why you came here tonight. The other thing I want to say as we dive into a conversation here, and you can interrupt or raise your hand or do whatever you want at any point along the way if you have something to add or something to question, and we'll add some time a little bit at the end. But I talk about purpose with a big P and purpose with a little p. Purpose with a big P is kind of that noble purpose that so many people say, oh, I don't have a purpose, and I need one, and how do I get one? And they see it, kind of see it as a cause-related thing. Purpose with a little p is what you do every single day to make a difference in the world around you or the lives of people around you. And so what I'm here to talk about mainly tonight is the little p purpose. So can I have a sigh of relief? Because oftentimes people say, oh, thankfully that I can live with, because there's 1,440 purpose moments in a day. And if you add sleep to that, it's less. But there's those chances to make a difference in the lives of the people around us. So I'm going to talk about that. So next slide. Joel's going to run the slides for me. Or he was going to, he just left. There we go. So the question is, how do I find my purpose? And this is what I hear all the time. If you Google, how do I find my purpose, you'll see almost 1 billion hits, more than how do I find happiness in life and all of that. Spoiler alert number 2, you don't find your purpose. It's not out there. It's in here and waiting to be unlocked. So I talk about unlocking the power of purpose, or unlocking purpose, and that's what I want to talk about. In this new book, there's a story about a man named Ed Rapp. Ed Rapp, when I used to work with him, was one of the senior executives at Caterpillar. You know, Caterpillar, the big earth-moving yellow machines out there. He was about to be named president worldwide of Caterpillar. And he was traveling the world. He was one of their 2 presidents of different divisions, and he was about to get, the nod to be the big one, the CEO. And he was going for a run with his son after coming back from Singapore on a long, and his foot was dragging. And he couldn't figure it out, and one thing led to another, and I actually got him to go to the Mayo Clinic, where he was diagnosed with ALS. He's 57 years old, at the height of his career. This is one of those leaders that you really trusted and wanted to follow. People just loved him. And he immediately, at age 57, resigned, went back to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he is now. He's in his 6.5 years of ALS. And Big P, so his name's Ed Rapp. Big P is that he created a foundation called Live Strong versus ALS. To date, they've raised over $17 million for ALS research, and he's gone on to become, on the Big P side, someone really into the cause. He's got arm crutches, he's got a recumbent bike, he does things. But here's the message. Little P, Ed Rapp, gets up every morning at 8 o'clock and coaches somebody he's never met before and will never meet in person that just was diagnosed with ALS, who's terrified and wants to know what to think and how to think and what this is all about. And he says to me, and I wrote this in this book, he said, this is the good life. He said, I am so alive and I feel so much better and so much healthier, even with my diagnosis, when I'm coaching somebody that has this, pro bono ALS. And so with all of us, we have the opportunity, regardless of our adversity along the way, to make a little p difference in life on a day-to-day basis. One of the people who has been, and you've all had fortuitous encounters in your life with different people along the way. Fortuitous meaning unplanned encounters. And one of the encounters I had back in the 60s, after I got out of graduate school in counseling psychology, I spent a week with a man named Viktor Frankl. How many of you have heard of Viktor Frankl? Lots and lots of you. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. I consider him kind of he died about 14 years ago, but I consider him one of the true icons in the purpose movement that I have been part of. Those of you who know Frankl's story, Frankl was a Viennese neurologist, psychiatrist who had created a school of thought called logotherapy, or meaning therapy, and he was training doctors how to be more human and purposeful in their work. At the height of his work in Vienna, Austria, he was taken by the Nazis, as was his pregnant wife Tilly, his parents, his grandparents, and his siblings, all in a boxcar. He had a coat, and this was pre-internet, and his wife Tilly had sewn a manuscript that he'd spent decades working on into his lining of his coat, which of course was taken away and destroyed the minute he got to. His whole family was killed, his pregnant wife Tilly, etc. He was liberated after 3.5 years from Auschwitz. He weighed 87 pounds. He went back to Vienna, and after he healed, he wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days. And he started to talk about his experience. And he said the last of the human freedoms is choice. It's to choose what you want that moment, that day to be about, regardless of what's going on at the time. So we all have adversities, like Ed Rapp has ALS. We all have things that happen in our life. We go through those transitions that Jim talked about. And whether it's you, it might be somebody that's in your life, in your family, in your community in certain ways. And what Frankl said was this. He said, don't ask what your purpose is. Ask, what is life asking of me right now in this moment? What is life asking of you in this moment? And another book of his just came out, which was 3 talks that he gave running up to writing the book, Man's Search for Meaning. And the title of this book is Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. So that's kind of my message in many ways, is say yes to life. And what does that mean? What are the practices? What's the path and what are the practices? How do I really find my purpose? As the American essayist said, I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. Well, think about it. It makes it easier to plan the day because it's about savoring life, whether you're retired or working or whatever you're in, whatever stage, and saving. And it doesn't mean literally saving, but it does mean saying yes to life and making a difference in the lives of others. So next slide, Joel. So science and faith both agree that purpose is fundamental. And one of the things, people who volunteer in faith-based organizations tend to live 4 to 14 years longer. One of the things that happened when I was out doing that neuroscience study, one of the doctors, his name is Dr. Fajid Matoui, an Iranian doctor at Johns Hopkins, held up this pill. And he says, Richard, you see that pill? And I said, yeah, what is it? And he said, well, would you buy it? And I said, well, what does it do? And he said, well, first of all, it reduces the effects of Alzheimer's and dementia substantially. It reduces macroscopic stroke by 41%. It helps with sleep apnea and adds 7 to 10 years to your life. And he said, so would you buy that? And I said, who wouldn't? But what cost? And he said, it's free. He said, we now know that purpose has a lot to do, that's the mindset, the positive say yes to life type of mindset. That has a lot to do with aging and has a lot to do with not only our longevity, but the quality of our lives in certain ways. I taught recently with a woman who won the Nobel Prize for medicine. Her name is Elizabeth Blackburn. She won the Nobel Prize for something. How many of you ever heard of the telomeres? Do you know what a telomere is? Not one person here knows? I didn't know. You know, because I've been talking about it. But the telomeres on every one of the chromosomes in your body, like a shoelace, there's a little tip on the end of that, and it's called a telomere. If that telomere shrinks, you age more quickly and you're more prone to illness. If that telomere grows, you age less rapidly, and you tend to be healthier. So the telomere effect, which is a book now written with Elizabeth Blackburn and Alyssa Epple, she won the Nobel Prize for finding that telomeres are affected by purpose, by how you think. So in case you think that this is some luxury, for the educated or whatever, it's not. It's something that we can all do something about. And so science and faith both agree that purpose is fundamental. I was mentioning to John and somebody else here, maybe it was you, Lance, but I can't remember, but I took a year off and went to the seminary about, I don't know how many years ago it was, I can't remember, but I went to United Theological Seminary to study purpose in world religions. And I wasn't going to be ordained, I didn't think, although I was a religion minor when I was at Gustavus. But I was really curious because, and what I discovered was obvious to probably all of you, and that is compassion is the soul of purpose. What we bring to life, that saying yes to life, it's that compassion that we bring to life, which is the soul of purpose. And every major religion that I studied talked about it in one fashion or another. And so the whole business of is purpose spiritual? Yep. Compassion is spiritual. So let me give you right now a default purpose. So if you can't walk out of here saying, what did this guy talk about? I can't remember, but at least that you walk out with a purpose. So I'm going to give you the default purpose. It's only 2 words: grow and give. That's it. If you get up in the morning, why do you get up in the morning? If you get up tomorrow morning to grow and to give, then you will be living purposefully. So I challenge you to do this. When you get home, take a Post-it, a little Post-it, and write on there, grow and give, and put it on your mirror. And tomorrow morning when you get up, then ask yourself, how am I going to grow and give today? And at the end of the day, before you go to sleep at night, ask yourself, how did I do? Did I grow and give today in certain ways? And when you do that over the course of several days, like a week, you'll have a felt sense. Like Ed Rapp, it feels good to make a difference. It feels good to step into life in various ways. So that's what I call the default purpose, to grow and give. Try it. I shared that very same message with this PBS special, and I still get people to say, I still got that damn thing on my mirror. I still keep looking at it all the time, but he said, they'll say, it's a practice, and it works. So the practice works if the process works if you work it. Okay, next slide. Usually I have a clicker here, but I didn't bring one. So what on earth am I here for? Well, you have to answer that question. We all have to come to some legacy answer, but I've been interviewing taxi cab drivers and other people like that for many years. I wrote a book called Claiming Your Place at the Fire, which I'll mention again, which has, at the beginning of every chapter, is a taxi cab driver story. But last week in Denver, I was there at something called the Noble Institute for Aging, and giving a talk and talking to some researchers. And so I took an Uber to downtown Denver. And my Uber driver taught me a lot. And what he taught me was this. So we're driving, and I could tell he was maybe even a bit older than me. And so we were talking, and he says, what are you going to go talk about? And I told him that what I was going to talk about was aging. And he turns around, he's driving, and he looks in the rear. He didn't turn around. He looked in the rearview mirror, and he says, you know how old I am? Well, you don't want to go too young, and you don't want to go too old, because it might be an insult one way or the other. I said, no, but I mean, you look senior. And he said, I'm 81. And I said, 81? And you're driving Uber. Why? And he said, well, I retired twice. But what I realized was that I was lonely. And I needed people. I needed connection. I needed to make a difference in people's lives. And, he kind of was using some of my own language there. And then he started to say that, and all of a sudden I realized, even the Surgeon General today, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who I happen to be on a program with, said that the epidemic of loneliness that's afoot today is more deadly than smoking and obesity. And he went on to give the medical facts. And you could write his book. It's called Together. It's a really fabulous book called Together, where he reports on the practices and the research of, and he said, in our lives we need 3 different kinds of people. We need intimates, people, like maybe spouses, partners, best friends. And then we need friends who we do stuff with, And then we also need community. And I think that's really, Jim, what this is all about in certain ways, is giving people the tools and the practices, but also providing them with a sense of overcoming that sense of aloneness or loneliness. And you can be in a crowd like this and feel lonely. So it's not just about numbers of people. It's about people who get you and who listen to you and who are committed listeners and things like that in life. And so spoiler alert number 3. I'm big on spoiler alerts tonight. Spoiler alert number 3 is, what's the answer to this question? What am I on earth here for? You answer it. My answer that I've looked at from under a microscope for a long time is to serve. Full stop, to serve. To bring your gifts to life from cradle to grave in a variety of ways, which I'll talk about. And Frankl talked about tragic optimism. There's his quote that I said, the last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude. But he talked about this defiant spirit. He said, in the concentration camp, I could get up with the will to live. I could give somebody else a kind word, a crust of bread, a slurp of soup. I could have hope for the future and hopefully even meet my beloved spouse, which never happened, of course. And so this whole mindset, purpose is a mindset, a choice, and it's also, a path and practice. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So the next slide is this. That's for many years that I've been interviewing people, and some of you here who have been with me before, and quite a number of you have said that, we crossed paths other places along the way, which is great, and thank you for being here tonight. But I've been interviewing people over the age of 65. I started because one of my former partners, John Berge here, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, we were partners, but I started to interview people over the age of 65 and ask them if they could live their life over again, what would they do differently? And I've done this continually now with every book I've written and every time I take a deep dive into this. And there's 3 things that these elders all say over and over again if they could live their life over again. Number 1, they would be more reflective the next time around. Well, what does that mean to be reflective? It means to stop and look at the big picture. Look at what really matters. Mattering matters, ultimately. Every human being wants to matter. So when I said, well, when did you reflect? And the answer is when there was a next chapter, when there was a point, an inflection point in their life, a crisis when they were forced to step back and look, like Ed Rapp or many people to look at the big picture and look at what am I going to do. During times of change, we go higher and we go deeper. And when we go deeper, we look at what doesn't change. What are the constants in your life? With the pandemic, many people looked at the constants. They looked at purpose and values. And I mean, in spite of the fact that my calendar went empty in pandemic, the phone lit and the Zoom lit up because people wanted help to look at kind of the what's next moment in their lives, or to look at and they started to look at the constants. And they call it now a lot of things, but some call it the Great Resignation. Some people call it the Great Reimagining. But so many people are making changes in their lives. Where they live, how they live, who they live with, where they work, all those kinds of choices. So we're not a society, we're a society of busyness, always going somewhere, never being there, and never stopping and really, centering in certain ways until we have to, and then we reflect. Secondly, if they could live their life over again, these elders said that they would take more risks the second time around. And the risks were mostly about relationships. They wanted deeper and better relationships, and it included work relationships and the work that they did. Many people said I spent 60% of my time working, and I didn't even like it, but it paid the bills, and I had to make it work for me in certain ways. And so, how do we age? We reflect. We take more risks, and the risk is to grow and to be curious. I'm sorry about dropping another name here, but I'll try to not do that too much longer. But I've had the privilege of a lot of fortuitous encounters in this work. And one of them was with a guy named Richard Saul Warman. You ever heard of him? Richard Saul Warman. Do you know TED? TED Talks? You ever done a TED Talk? He's the founder of TED. And in the 80s, early 80s, he wanted to, before the internet, he wanted to create these ultimate dinner parties where he would bring in somebody from technology, entertainment, and design to have a conversation around a particular question to see where the intersections were. And out of that, he created TED. And so I was backstage with Richard Saul Warman, who's in his late 80s. And he said, we're in Providence, Rhode Island, and he says, Richard, what are you going to be talking about tonight? And I said, purpose. And he went, ugh. He scoffed at me, and I said, well, Richard, what are you going to be talking about? And he said, I'm talking about curiosity. Don't you think that curiosity is what really fuels and ignites purpose and keeps people alive? If you're not curious about yourself and your own growth, curious about the persons with you or others, you're dying in certain ways. And so he said, he's going to talk about curiosity. And I said, well, what is curiosity to you? You founded TED, and there's billions of people who watch TED Talks now because they're curious about something. And he said, yeah, that's right. And then he reached over, in the green room in these places, the backstage, they'll have a bowl of fruit and some water and things like that. So he reaches over and he grabs a banana and he hands it to me and he said, hey, do you like bananas? You go to Africa, I understand. I heard you probably watch chimpanzees eat bananas, right? And I said, yeah, I have. And so I started to eat the banana, and he laughed and he said, you're not very curious, are you? I went, why? He said, have you ever watched a chimp eat a banana? They eat it from the bottom. They flip it over, that stem, and it gets under your nails and all that stuff. And he said, if you flip it over and you start to do it, it's real easy. And that's the way chimps do it. They just like that. So ever since then, for the last 10 years, I eat bananas, which I love, from the bottom. And then he said this. He said, here's my definition, of curiosity. It's observing or finding or discovering the extraordinary in the ordinary. It's seeing what oftentimes others don't see, but is right there in front of you. You don't have to go to, some exotic place to do that. That's okay too. But curiosity is day-to-day wakefulness, aliveness, and that's what fuels, in many ways, this whole business of how to age. The third point was reflection, risk-taking, curiosity, and the third thing is purpose. Everybody I've interviewed in my life doing this, and being kind of a pioneer in some ways in the purpose movement, as John mentioned, wants their life to matter. They want to leave their thumbprint, their dent, their legacy somehow in the universe. And I know I was giving a talk once in Alexandria, Minnesota, way up north, about 4 hours from here, 5 hours, whatever it is. And this was pre-mobile phones. Somebody walked right down the aisle into the front of the room and handed me a slip of paper and said, call home right now. And I said, well, I'm now. I said, okay. So I stopped and pushed the pause button, and I went out and found a phone. And my wife said that, Richard, your mother has had a stroke. She's in St. Joseph's Hospital in St. Paul. She's not going to make it through the night. You better come home. And this is about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And we still had another day to go at this retreat that I was leading at the time. And she had had breast cancer 10 years earlier, but she was doing great, taking great care of herself and all of that, but now she'd had this massive stroke. And so I got there about 11 o'clock at night. I left and went to St. Joseph's Hospital. And you know, when you get that kind of news, and maybe you've had it, all of a sudden the music sounds differently, the words play differently, the sunset looks different. You know that what's probably coming here, and you get flashbacks on what really matters and what's important and your life and your relationships and things like that. So I got there, and I was the only one there, and except for the nurse who was in the intensive care. And I went into the room, and I just said, could you just leave me alone here for a minute so I can just get my wits about me? And I just lost it. I just paced back and forth. I didn't know what to do. I hadn't been in a situation like this. And then it occurred to me that maybe I should thank her. And so I actually got up on the bed, which is, I think, illegal. But I got up on the bed, picked up my mom, who was taking these big, deep breaths with her eyes closed in a coma. And I said, Mom, I think it's time to go. Thank you. And when I said thank you, she opened up her eyes and took 2 more breaths and died in my arms. And I tell you that because we're in a sanctuary. And I tell you that because at the end of our lives, we all want to matter. And she was a stay-at-home mom in an immigrant family, and she had 2 boys. I was the one that was there at that moment. And that was her life. And you know, we all have, everybody here is an experiment of one. You've all got your own pending legacy. You've all got your own way to matter in life. And hopefully it's on a day-to-day, why do I get up in the morning basis. And so how to age, reflect, be curious, and third, mattering matters. So next slide. So the question that this new book that's out here, and I'm not pushing the book, but I'm just saying, most people say this is my best book. And even I kind of say that. But probably it's because I'm living in it right now. You know, and the others are past, but they're... but the question was triggered by my philosophy professor, colleague, and co-author, David Shapiro. He's a tenured philosophy professor in Seattle, Washington. And I were at a Twins game, and back when the Twins were good. And we were sitting there, and it started to rain. So they stopped the game, put a tarp on the field. We went to get a beer and walk around the concourse and talk. And we started to talk about this question, what did you want to be when you grew up? And so what did you want to be when you grew up? Think about that for a minute. And how did that turn out? You know, it's different for all of us. And it's not a good question to ask young people today, because they're going to go through a lot of what do you want to be when you grow up type of transitions in life. And so the next chapter and the next chapter and the next chapter is going to be not just for older people, it's going to be for all kinds of ages, as we've talked about. I grew up with this mental model of aging. So my question here is, what is your mindset? What is your mental map of aging? And as I said, if you change your mental model, you can live longer, happier, healthier, this kind of thing. So the bottom here shows, I don't know if you can see it exactly, but that's life, childhood, adolescence. You know, it used to be, and you know, you would learn, you would earn, and then you would retire and die. And that's what happened to my dad. He retired after 40 years at the same organization and died within 18 months. And it kind of freaked me out as I kind of started to look at my own life and his life, et cetera. But that was then. That was an era then, and different reasons for that, I realize. The vertical axis is personal growth. It's curiosity or growth. So grow up, grow down, grow old. is the old model. You remember the book Passages? How many of you have heard Passage? You know when that book came out? 47 years ago. That's still the mental model that many people live with, because Passages ended at midlife. They didn't go beyond. So David and I wrote a new book to go beyond midlife. There's also something which I haven't seen for a while called The Game of Life. You seen that board game, The Game of Life? It came out in 1865. It's still based on this model today. And don't you think it's time for a new game, for a new model, for a new image in certain ways? And so, next slide. So how do I stop living a default life? So many people, there's a chapter in the book called How Do I Stop Living a Default Life? And so many people are going forward, looking in the rearview mirror, living in the past in certain ways, and not curious, opening up to the windshield, to the next phase of life in certain ways. And so this is the media has paid more. I've done over 80 interviews for this book. Everything from the New York Times, the Washington Post, you name it, because the default life is the one they want to talk about. They said so many people are stuck living in a default life. And so, and one of the things that my wife and I talk about, and she doesn't like it very much, is I said, you know, nothing's worse for me than being at a party or a dinner or an airplane ride, sitting next to a former anything. You got what I'm saying? Former, still stuck in, well, I was, and I said, well, what are you up for now? What are you curious about? What brings you aliveness in your life now? And oftentimes, there isn't that sense of joy. There's kind of a polarity. So how do I stop living a default life? One of my colleagues, not David, but another one of my colleagues, when you call him on his phone, and you get his voicemail, it says, at the sound of the tone, please leave your answer to life's two eternal questions. Who are you and what do you want? Isn't that clever? Life's two eternal questions. Who are you and what do you want? So at different stages of our life, the who are you, what do you want question comes up. And so I've been trying to answer that question. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. You have a reason for being here. What is it? So let's take a look at what that might be. So let's look at the next stage of life, the next slide. So the question then, if it's not what do you want to be when you grow up, who do you want to be when you grow old or older in certain ways? Now, look at this same image, except we've added a whole new life stage. For 5 years, I was half-time in Washington, D.C., as the founder and creator of the Life Reimagined Institute at AARP, studying the future of aging. And what we found is that the longevity revolution, you know, AARP, you join at 50, but it used to be you didn't live that much longer. Now, the fastest growing cohort in the country is almost 87 and over. Now, none of us knows, none of us has promised the future in certain ways, but what does that portend in terms of your mindset, your practices, the way you live your life? Do you want to live it in the rearview mirror or not? So we have this whole new life phase. But you see that dip there in the middle? The researchers call that the U-curve of happiness. The most unhappy time of life, according to the research right now, is in midlife. It's between about 42 and 60. Some of you are going like, yep, whether you're in that or have been in that or something. And the two happiest times in life are back here when we're moving, you know, we grow up twice. First from adolescence to adulthood, then we grow up a second time from adulthood to elderhood, hopefully. That's a new phase of life. And so you see the upscale there to the right as it sort of goes up, and then it's what we call compressed morbidity. You know, you want to die short, you know, not a lengthy death process. And retirement, sorry, Jim, but so many people now are retiring retirement. They're doing whole new ways of doing that are new models of doing it if they retire at all. They might continue working, they may not. That's up to you how you want to do it. People say, I'm 78. People say, well, can't you retire? And I said, yeah, but why would I want to give up doing something I love to do so much? And I continue to grow with it, and I continue to meet people like you. I get a chance to be with people in a whole lot of different ways. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but that's my choice in certain ways to not retire, and I don't plan to retire. You know, I cut back a little here and there, but basically make other choices along the way. So that's the U-curve of happiness. The next slide then is the windshield. So if you're not living in the rearview mirror, the windshield is a lot bigger than the rearview mirror. And how do you live the good life? Well, our definition, David and I, he's a philosopher. He went way back to Plato and Aristotle and all these different philosophers writing about the good life way back when. And then we went forward and did a lot of interviews about what is the good life. And the good life has 4 characteristics, the way that we write about it. Living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the right work, the work you love, whether it's avocational or volunteer or whatever it is, with purpose. Place, people, right work, purpose. And right work can be spiritual work on yourself or others. It can be a whole lot of definitions, and I'll give you one next for what that means. But I want to push the pause button for a minute and just give you a bit of a respite here to just 30 seconds and just turn to the person next to you, whether you know them or not, and just say, yeah, I think I'm living in the place I love, the people I love, doing the work I love. And don't just blow it off, you know. It's like place is really important. But if you're in a place without the right relationships, what's that place like? Have you ever been on a vacation and had an argument with the person you're with? What happened to the place? It kind of escapes into the ether because it's all about, so place, and a lot of people move to a place and then they move back because the relationships weren't there in certain ways. So place, people, right work, and purpose. And so take just 30 seconds and just turn the person next to you, and if you don't know them, introduce yourself and just say, so how are you doing with this good life? Yeah. Are you looking through the windshield here? So just a quick conversation. How are you? Do you still have an office over there? No, you moved out of that office.
I have an office across the street in my little condo.
I moved to my condo too.
Huh?
I moved. Regis now. Okay. In Denver, I went into a bookstore called The Tattered Cover. And independent bookstores are few and far between, and this is a really good one. There's one also at the airport. And I was going in there, of course, to see if they were carrying my books, but I asked the woman at the front desk or the information desk, I said, "Can you tell me where the self-help section is?" And she looked at me and she said, "Well, if I tell you, won't that defeat the whole purpose?" Very clever. And so we're not talking here about new agey self-help. What we're talking about here is self-realization. You know, the bookstore now has, it used to be there were no books on aging. Now you go in there and there's racks of books on health and aging and all of this. Why? There's a longevity revolution. We're living longer. We're wanting to live with more choices and differently and in terms of where we live and how we live and all of that. And so it's time to get curious and open up and look at the windshield in certain ways. So the next slide is kind of the core slide of my presentation. How do you unlock the power of purpose? I said it's not out there finding it, it's in here unlocking it. How do you go about unlocking it? And this is the formula that I've worked on for decades. It may seem very simple, but think about it for a minute. Gifts, it's called the napkin test. The napkin test, by the way, came to me when I was on an airplane going to London, and some guy who had seen my PBS special was sitting next to me. I was working on a speech, and I had to get some sleep because the next day I had to give a talk in London, and he kept bugging me, and he said, "Got a minute? Can you tell me what to do with the rest of my life?" And I said, you know, you did a PBS special and all of that. I just got fired or laid off or something. I have to go clean out my apartment and move back, and I'm lost. I'm at one of those points where I need what you're offering here. I need a place to go and figure this out. And so I said, look, I got to do this. I got to wake up and do this tomorrow morning. Take out that napkin there. And I wrote this formula, G plus P plus V equals C. Gifts plus passions plus values equals calling. And what I find is that we all are born with gifts, and we all develop gifts in our life. So think for a moment here about your gifts. Or think about a person that you're with, or it could be a kid or a grandkid, but think about yourself for a minute here. Gifts are those things that have these four characteristics. A gift is something that you love to do. You just naturally love to do it, whether you're paid to do it or not paid to do it. It's something your hand turns to naturally, and you really enjoy doing it. Secondly, a gift is something that others observe you doing effortlessly and superbly, or doing it well and enjoying it. So sometimes we get feedback from others. Third, you can't remember learning it. I don't know. I've always been doing this. I developed a tool called calling cards. And when I developed this tool, I went back and interviewed parents, teachers, siblings to say, oh, I'll use you. Was Lance always like this? He always a good listener, a good coach, et cetera, like that? Oh, yeah. What about, how many of you have siblings? Are your siblings' gifts the same as yours? Or if you have kids or grandkids or relatives, you see they're different, right? How do we figure this out? Where's the guidance? At midlife, these questions come up again, mid and later life. It's not just earlier in life. You can't recall learning it. I don't know, I've always been doing this. And I have always been a pretty good listener. Now, I'm not always that way, but I've always practiced listening. And of course, you say, well, counseling and coaching. But even before all that, I always listened for what wasn't said, what was felt in the situation but wasn't being said. And I listen for a living, and then write about it or talk about it in certain ways. And what about you? The fourth thing is you like learning more about it. So enjoy it. Others observe you enjoying it or doing it effortlessly. Can't recall learning it. and love to learn more about it now. So last point here before I wrap things up and pull things together on this formula, just turn to the person again next to you and just say, well, one of my gifts is, and be very okay about it. Not like, oh, well, you know, I don't have a gold medal in it, I don't have a degree in it. It doesn't matter. It is something that we all have, and when we can bring these gifts out in others and in the world, that's the power of purpose in so many ways. So just a quick check-in with the person next to you. One of my gifts that I really love to do is blank, and then, go ahead. Okay, let's get back together. So gifts are what you want to serve. Passions are who do you want to serve. What do you want to use your gifts in the service of? What are you curious about? And you use that Frederick Buechner quote, John, to open things up about gifts. You know, you can close with that later, but that's what brings the purpose to life, is to use our gifts in the service of others that we care about in environments that are healthy for you. One of my first jobs when I got out of graduate school was in the field of personnel. You remember personnel? They now call HR or other names. But I went first with General Mills, and then I was one of the top, actually, HR people at what is now U.S. Bank. But it used to be called First Bank at the time. But I had a side hustle. You know side hustle? Like my own little gig that I did. It's called Lunch Hour Limited. You buy me lunch, I coach you. I was trained as a counselor, and so, you know, if you bought me lunch, so I had a booming lunch hour practice. Now, George Dixon, the president at the time of the bank, didn't think this was such a good idea. Because some of these people, after I coached them, left. In fact, I had an 80% success rate. 80% of the people I coached left. And I decided that I was good enough at this that maybe I could do this full time. And so I did a couple things en route, but I found that so many of the people who wanted that kind of guidance, that lunch hour limited guidance, were the people that bank didn't want to lose, but they were the ones that were curious. They wanted to grow. They wanted to do certain things. And they didn't have guidance at that point, even as young people, about who do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you want to do when you grow up? And so they had to figure it out along the way. And many of them, by the way, didn't actually leave They left their current job and went somewhere else in the organization, or went back to their supervisor and reinvented their job around their gifts, passions, and values to, to really discern their calling. Is your calling calling? What is calling you at this stage of your life to in this whole purpose thing that we're talking about here? Okay, next slide, 2 more slides. So, I mentioned earlier that I wrote a book called Claiming Your Place at the Fire. David Shapiro and I wrote this. What this book is about, basically, what the title is about, is that going to Africa, which I've done, and I first went there in 1983. I was on the board of organization, Outward Bound. I was on the board of Outward Bound. I went to climb Kilimanjaro with the Board of Trustees group to raise money and to visit the Kenya Outward Bound School. And it changed my life forever. When I got there, there was just something about the smell and everything about the place that seemed like I couldn't wait to go back. And I've gone back, except for the pandemic, I've gone back every year now since 1983. Claiming your place at the fire, one of the things I noticed was sitting around the fire with elders, tribes in Africa, the wisest of the elders sat the closest to the fire. Not the oldest, but the wisest of the elders. And so one day I was sitting there trying to figure this out, and I was interviewing this elder from a hunter-gatherer tribe called the Hadza hunter-gatherers. And he said, who are the elders in your tribe? Blank. I said, well, I don't have a tribe. And he said, we have to have a tribe. You can't survive without a tribe. He said, we've been around 75,000 years, they tell me. We don't do it unless we have, we do it together. It's a total sharing culture, by the way. They share everything. These folks in this are using a little fire stick like this. This is actually a real one. And they're making fire with a fire stick. They're going like little grass, put it in this little hole here, like this, and they're making fire. So I'm looking at these people who've been around all these years as a sharing culture. And the wisest, why are the wisest sitting closest to the fire? Because they are the fonts of wisdom. They are the ones that have the stories. They are the ones that people trust. And so after I couldn't answer the question, who's in your tribe, I decided to thank this guy named Kampala, who's in his 80s, for interviewing with me and leading me out there. And I was carrying a knife, a buck knife. And I noticed the hunter-gatherers, they only have a bow and arrow, a knife, and maybe a honey axe. That's it. But his knife had been sharpened so many times on the stone, it looked like a grapefruit knife like this. And I looked at it, and I was carrying this knife that I wouldn't know what to do with if I had to use it. And so I took it out, and it was in a sheath, and I gave it to Kampala. And as a way of, I said, Sante Sana, thank you very much. And he looked at it admiringly, and he turned around and gave it to a young guy behind him. And I said to him, Kampala, that was a thank you to you for, with gratitude for all you've done for us. And he said, I already have a knife. And this guy didn't have a knife. He said, in our culture, the only way we've survived is to share what we have. And I said, then I asked him, why didn't you give him the grapefruit knife? And he looked at me like I was an alien. He said, that would be the worst moral breach. We share everything. And as elders sitting around the fire, what we share is our wisdom because we're trying to bring out those gifts, passions, and values in others. He didn't use all that language, but that's where he was going with that whole thing. So how to claim your place at the fire is really what we're talking about here. And one of the ways to do it is to don't go it alone. Have a sounding board. I would not coach anybody unless they had a sounding board. A sounding board is who are your dedicated listeners. That's one of the things that I would strongly urge as part of the curriculum here in this new next chapter is that you help people create a sounding board. And a sounding board has 4 characters on it in the way I think about it. Number 1 is a committed listener. Who's your committed listener? Who's the person that when you've got one of these kerfuffles, one of these that listens to you and cares enough to tell me more, as opposed to they practice care versus cure. They're not fixing you, they're interested versus trying to be interesting in certain ways. Who's your committed listener? Secondly, who's your wise elder? Whose are the exemplars of aging that you look at and say, no, there's someone I can learn something from. And I've had many of those along the way, and like the Viktor Frankls and others in life. Sometimes they're fortuitous encounters, but sometimes they're people in our families, communities, etc. Third, who's your wise younger? Who's someone in your life who asks you those good questions and challenges you in certain ways because they think differently, they have a different mindset about this whole thing. And fourth, who is your purpose partner? Who's that person who holds your feet to the fire? It could be a professional coach for a while until you find one, but a purpose partner is somebody who basically wants you to live your authentic life, not their authentic life in certain ways. So who are your purpose partners? Who are the people that you sit around the fire with? And when do you have a fire pit here, by the way?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
We need a fire pit here, not inside the building, but yeah. But sitting around the fire, things happen when you look at the flames in a fire that don't happen in other ways. And so it's just another way to think about what we're talking about. Finally, I gave you this challenge before, and I'll add to this right now, and then we'll stop and see if you have any comments, questions, or thoughts. But grow and give is the default purpose. And you can get at your purpose through gifts, passions, and values when you start to really dig in and look at what are my gifts? What do I bring to the world? What difference do I want my life to make in certain ways? So the 2-minute practice in the morning, 2-minute practice every morning. I call it mind over mattress. First you pause. In other words, maybe you have to use the restroom or something like that, but then when you lay down again, you pause for a minute, you don't go for your phone, your computer, something else. Secondly, you take 3 deep breaths. 3 deep breaths. And that centers you. It's a martial art to do that, but it's 3 deep breaths that gets you in your body. And the third thing you do is then ask yourself, whose life can I make a difference in today? How can I show up today to grow and give? So you do that in the morning, you look at the Post-it, and all of a sudden you're living purposefully. So that's my message. And I told you and could tell you stories about others that I do know that all of us want our lives to matter in certain ways. And at the end of our lives, David Brooks writes about legacy virtues versus resume virtues. And I'm often asked to do memorial services for people. I have been quite a few times. And you notice in a memorial service from someone who's passed on, it starts out with resume virtues. Who was this? How old were they? And who are they? And how do they relate? And then it starts to dig into who they really were in our lives and what really mattered in terms of who they were and what value they added to us. And so compassion is the soul of purpose, and it's from cradle to grave we're called to grow and give our whole lives. So, thank you for listening. Thank you. So before we put a wrap on things, are there questions, challenges, comments? You've been very patient this evening.
And both John and I have microphones. So you can come to where you are if you have a question.
We'll just take a few.
But first I want to say again, Richard, that I can't imagine a better kickoff to this
thank you.
Next chapter.
Thank you.
You gave us a lot to think about and a lot of challenges, which I know we're all eager to pursue. And I sure wish I could go home to a fire pit, but unfortunately I can't. So those that do, enjoy.
Yeah.
So again,
And by the way, that's my website. Everything on it is free. I don't sell anything there, so you can download blogs and all kinds of things and videos, etc., if you have any interest in following up on it. So it's not selling it.
and I would encourage you to go to our webpage. We have a survey up now, and it will let you have a chance to say what you'd like to see next chapter be, what things you'd like to have be part of it, what resources you'd like to have. If you'd like to be in a small support group of people going through the same next chapter transition that you are, if you'd like to lead one, and it will give you an opportunity to give us your email address if you'd like to get on an email list. That we promise not to spam you, but we'll send out probably a monthly update on upcoming speakers, new resources that we have, and that kind of thing. So wonderful kickoff, and let's see what questions you have. And again, Richard's going to sign books after we're done here. So who has a question?
Herb?
I have a comment. I retired. I decided to retire at age 70 when I was involved in the University of Minnesota. And all of a sudden, I decided I needed to get a new set of tires on my Dodge Journey, so I bought 4 new tires, and I said, that's what retirement means, put new tires in your car. I said, why didn't I think of that earlier? So
There you go.
Anyone else? Okay.
I'd just like to say that this was very encouraging. And going through a transition, retiring, death of a spouse, you do spend a lot of time reflecting. What comes next? What does this mean? And just your overall message for me was very hopeful, and I love the line going up. So I'm very encouraged, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. Yeah, right. By the way, I mentioned that we started this book at a Twins game, and it got rained out. And so the first chapter in the book is called The Long Conversation, but it started as we were walking, and then we got rained out. And then the last chapter in this book is called The Ultimate Conversation. So it begins someplace, but life ends someplace. So we took on that, and my publisher just about fainted when he said, you're going to put in how you want to die in this book? And he said, books on aging and dying don't sell. And I said, they do now. And if you look at Atul Gawande and you look at these books out there about being mortal and all, these books are off the charts because people are more reality based, that there are options, there are choices here, and if you start to look at the ending, it makes life more precious today in terms of these choices. And so the last chapter of The Ultimate Conversation has the 3 questions that we need to ask ourselves at the end of our lives. And we actually answered those. And my publisher and my wife just about fainted when they saw how what's the right word, how real it was. This was not New Age. This was like life the way, and you don't have to agree with what we want, but you have to ask these questions ultimately. Yes. So we call it the ultimate conversation.
Anyone else? Well, see, I think you answered all their questions, Richard.
Well, I talked longer than they probably thought because, sitting for an hour these days and listening is a real gift, so thank you for that.
That's wonderful. Well, I hope you all can come back on November 10th to see Alan Hilton and Ann Harbison in January. Finalize the date. And Ann Harbison in January. We'll work with her to finalize a date and topic, but I know it'll be, very powerful. So hope to see you again soon, and in the meantime, go to our website, let us know what you want, and we'll try and deliver. Thank you.